rectification. You can drive Jigsaw off of these menus at the top, or I like to drive them off of this schematic diagram here. I'm just clicking my mouse button on these. And this is not just a nice pretty graphic, it's actually there to show you what screens come off of what part. So it just helps as a guide to the program. Because Jigsaw will do amazing things, but you know there's one thing it won't do? It will not print out a horoscope. Intentionally. You use Solidify for that. It's not about charting, doing a chart. So all its screens are really radically different to the astrologer's eye. They're really, because they're doing different things. So the different screens are laid out here. All right, rectification. The first thing you need to do with rectification is to put in the person's birth date and their place and what you know about them in terms of their birth data. None of Cyril Fagan's date of birth, etc., was on that list of dates of event. It started off with his father's death. The place where you edit the person's date of birth is here under Edit Natal Details. This is quite important. People tend to forget this bit. So you literally write the person's name, their date of birth, if the time is unknown, where they were born, the zone standard that they're born under, and if you know the range. Now, we're going to do this rectification for like a whole 24 hours. But if someone says, look, I'm born just after dawn, but, somewhere in there, then you could say, 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. and put that range in. And that will dramatically reduce your workload. It will dramatically reduce the options you're given, which means that it cuts to the chase a lot more quickly. So this is where you put the range. So you put the range, that timing range, in this area. So once again, rectification, edit natal details goes in there. Now, we can do the whole thing automatically, and that's like having me do it for you, but the trouble is I've got to try and make decisions before I see your data. Interesting, right? Took a long time to construct the auto-rectify module on this, but we're going to step through the manual. I use both. I run auto just to see what it comes up with, then I go back through it manually and I play back and forth. Whatever way you go, whether you go automatically or manually, you get this screen, and this screen checks your data. And it checks the dates you've put in. It doesn't have any idea of the quality or the value, but it simply looks at how close the dates are together. Because if you notice here, these dates are only 2 days apart. Now, if we're trying to look at a major transit to his angles, what are we looking at? It's the same event, aren't we? It's the same transit. And indeed, you really should try and have no more dates more than 6 months apart. Oh, sorry, they should be no closer than 6 months apart. If you want to, you can ignore that and continue. Jigsaw gives you total free rein. You can totally ignore that and continue, but you're continuing on under your own, with warning flags flying, so to speak. Better to actually get in and turn the events off to clear that list up. You can click Edit Events here, and I'm going to go through, and I've got a list here. I'm going to turn event. You've got to make decisions, so you don't want to delete them, you just want to turn them off, because you're probably going to go and turn the other ones off and leave these ones on and try it again another way. You're going to sort of play around a little bit, but I'm going to cut some corners here. I'm going to turn event. Now, I could have chosen the other ones, the other pair that was clashing with it, and that's your choice. And that's another reason why you don't want to delete them. You want to just turn them off so you can run the whole thing again later on, making other decisions to see if it sharpens things up for you. Click OK. Now we see we've got no warnings and we can happily go ahead. We've got 21 events, 5 are disabled, we've got 16 usable events, we've got exact dates of 14, and that's really good. We can proceed. Okay, are you ready? Has everybody got their seat belts on? All right, okay. We can click continue. Now, all of a sudden you start seeing screens you've probably never seen before. And you think, holy cow, what are we looking at? All right. Very, very briefly, because we can't do a whole lesson on rectification. These are graphs, 0 to 30. They're the degrees of a zodiac sign. Doesn't matter what zodiac sign, just 0 to 30 of any zodiac sign. What Jigsaw's done is every date that you put in the data file, it's gone through, and for that date, it's looked where the planets are. And if the planet, and it's worked out, even if it would just work the exact date, it works out the planets are at a particular degree, and it has a particular way it rounds off that degree, and let's say you've got Pluto at 20 and Jupiter at 5 and Saturn at 15 of zodiac signs, well then it will put a little dick on the graph for Pluto at 20 and then another count for Jupiter at whatever it was that I said, and so on. So it does that for the first date, so you actually start to get just one little bit of the bar under 1 degree, etc. Then it goes to the next date and does the same thing. The next date and does the same thing. So slowly you're building up a bar graph. And you're building up a bar graph of what are the sensitive degrees between 0 and 30 in this person's life. In other words, these are the events that have happened to the person, and these are the degrees, forget the zodiac signs, these are the degrees which the planets were stressing when those events happened. Now there's going to be planet stressing degrees that are not relevant to his chart, so you get all sorts of ups and downs. But interestingly enough, when we get these peaks, you think, well, now what the hell is going on at 8 degrees of something or other? What the hell is going on here around 2022 and 24? Because a lot of the times when things have happened to this person, there's been planets at those degrees. Do you get what's happening? Because that's important. If you get that, you actually understand what we're doing with Jigsaw Rectification.
Well, what are the green lines going across?
That's the average. Oh, that's the standard deviation, and this is the average.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So this shows you the peaks above the standard deviation. Here we've got what the planets are that are made to construct the graph. It's a geocentric transit graph, and it's done in the 12th harmonic. Then you've got 3 graphs here, and you can change what you're going to do. This will default to what I think is the best thing for rectification. And this is not Bernadette sitting in an armchair thinking, I think that's what's going to work. I think I have a filing cabinet drawer at home, and it's like that thick with letters. And each letter is a person's life on a page, and I've rectified their chart for them. So that's how much I've done. I mean, I was doing this manually back in 1984, drawing these things up. So when I say I think this is what works best, I really mean that. But you can change it, but it will default to these positions.
Now,
yes.
So can I just ask, I did have one little play with it, got that far, and got some red peaks.
Yep, I'll show you that.
Oh. Took right and left.
Yeah. You can get a red peak by clicking on one of them. You see if I move the mouse into one of the graphs, see how it turns to a crosshair?
Yeah.
Now if I click on that, see we've suddenly filled this in here? So if I click on that, that says, that is a peak at 23 degrees of, and because it's a 12th harmonic, it's 23 degrees of any zodiac sign, so it's got 23 degrees of cardinal fixed, middle, fire, earth, air, water. In other words, any zodiac sign. That's what your red...
No, it didn't look like that. The whole peak was red.
Well, I can do that as well. Oh, no, you did that in the other screen. I'll show you that in the other screen.
Oh, right. I don't know where I did it.
Yeah. Now, geocentric transits, heliocentric transits. I like to cross-reference the 2 secondary progressions. You can change these graphs. Go down here to options. Graph 1, geocentric graph, heliocentric graph, plot transits, secondary progressions, tertiaries or solar right directions in that graphic format. Plot what planets? Plot these planets and points. Can you see how you can alter what's in the graph? Graph 2, I've set for heliocentric. You can change that. Plot these planets for heliocentric. Graph 3, because we've got graph 3, we've just simply set it to secondary progressions with these planets. Now, why do that? First of all, it's interesting to explore. This really is the best combination for rectification. But there's always, you can do more with Jigsaw. You can always do more. It depends. I mean, if you're all fire like I am, you want more, you want other questions, right? You might know your time of birth. You might have it down pat. But Jigsaw, the rectification side, does something magical. I think it's magical anyway. It does this. Let's just play with this. Let's take this graph here. Options. Graph 3. And let's just plot Cyril Fagan's sun. So for every event we've got, Jigsaw's just going to take his sun, and we're going to do it by transit, right? The transiting position of the sun, and where it was in his chart, between 0 and 30 of a degree, for all the events that he had. And here it is. Now you think, well, so what? Well, I find it interesting that his sun, when things happen to him, when the sun is at about 2 degrees of a zodiac sign, or 8 degrees of a zodiac sign, or 16 or 18 degrees of a zodiac sign. There's spots in his chart which are sensitive to transits of the sun then. Now you think, well, that's probably the same for all planets. Oh no, not at all. This is the magical thing. Let's look at his Mars. How different. His Mars functions differently as it moves through his chart. You're actually looking at almost like taking the horoscope and plugging in an electronic cardiograph. Do you know you're actually getting a printout of how each planet sees the chart? Let's look at how his chart, sees Saturn. Different again, Saturn. Let's have a quick look at Jupiter.
Jupiter and Saturn.
And they're all working at 2 degrees as
Yeah.
well. 2 degrees has got to be on everyone.
See what we're doing? I mean, if I actually had these just one planet as well, we'd get a bigger graph, because they're actually, it's got a scale here which is in proportion to that, so it's keeping this small. You've got less data, you're only using one planet. But this has nothing to do with rectification. Well, one little it is, because I like to look at how each planet is seeing a chart, and I start to get a feel for it. And this is telling me that this guy's Saturn and the Jupiter is actually fairly big. It gives me information. I have these little things I run in my head that chart rulers have a bit more punch as they move through a chart. But do you know, like, it gets you asking interesting questions on how the different transiting planets see your chart. So even if you know your birth time, you may want to do this. Right? I think it's interesting anyway. But we'll move on, but I just wanted to show you that. We can also edit the events again. So in this graph, you can go in and change things again, turn things off and on, etc., and just see how it changes the graphs. You can get in and out of your events, back and forth. So you've got total control over those graphs. You've got what you're graphing, whether it's geo or helio, whether you're doing transit, solar, tertiary progressions or secondary progressions, and you can even change the harmonic. You can change, this is all 12th harmonic, you can do 4th harmonic, you can do 5th harmonics, you can do harmonic graphs to try and find the modality of the peaks. It doesn't work. I don't know why it doesn't work. It doesn't work, but you can try it. I mean, if you do get it working, let me know, because I've tried it on hundreds of charts and I can't get a consistent pattern. The 12th harmonic is the one that really works for this. All right. This is just the beginning, but what you're really looking for here is a couple of really decent spiky graphs that sort of agree with each other, and you're getting that there. You really have to then take the next step, and Jigsaw wants you to know what graph do you want Jigsaw to work on. Graph number 1, graph number 2, graph number 3. I always prefer to work with a combination of graphs, and I usually always work with 1 and 2. I work to get the helio and the geo nicely overlapping each other in some way. But you can select what graphs you take forward and use for rectification. We'll take graph 1 and 2 and we'll go select. I mean, you can print these out, you can bail out and go into auto rectify if you're totally confused and think, ah! In other words, you can just push the button and it will do it for you. But hey, that's not the fun, right? Okay, next, new screen. And this is the one, whoever made something all red, this is the one you were on.
Oh yeah, I got red
Okay.
ones like that.
Now, Jigsaw's taken the 2 graphs that you've given, here they are. It's looked at these 2 graphs and it said, oh, it always is looking for common peaks. It's telling you how many units are in each graph, which is important. If you've only got 10 units in something, that's not very viable. You want, at least 70 odd units on a graph. And you've got common peaks here. If you see, you've got this peak at 8 here and this peak at 8 here, and Jigsaw says, by golly, these 2 have got a common peak. That's really important. It's really important because it's like cross-referencing. You're getting it happening in 2 different ways of thinking. And this one has a peak at 2, and this one has that interesting peak at 22. So it's taken them, it's shown you, it's made them red, and it's actually then taken these and it's told you what peaks it's working with. The red are the selected peaks, and says, right, these are the peaks you've selected. There's a common peak which ranges from 7 to 10 degrees. It's taken, making sure it's covering the whole thing. And then graph 2, number 2, has a peak at 2. Graph number 1 has a peak at 22. So she listed them down. Now I can override that, but the reason why it's done this is it's taken another step, and this is the next important step to understand. It said, okay, it's gone off and it's found that Cyril was born in a particular longitude and latitude. I've forgotten where it was, but it's in the birth data. Right? It's gone and got that. And then it said, right, let's pretend it's London. I don't know where it is. I can't get it. Dublin, is it? Oh, how good. Both part number 1. Okay, so it's he's born in Dublin, and Dublin has a particular longitude and latitude. More importantly, has a particular latitude. And if you have an ascendant of 2 degrees of a zodiac sign, doesn't matter which one, but if you have an ascendant of 2 degrees of a zodiac sign, there's only certain numbers of degrees you can have as an MC, isn't there? That if you're going to have, you could look at the 12 signs rising, when they get to 2 degrees, you can simply look to see what's the MC. And Jigsaw's done that, and if the MC is not one of these other peaks, or 2 degrees as well, then it said, can't possibly, these sets of peaks can't be a set of angles for Dublin, spit it out. So it's gone through and looked at all of these as ascendants and MCs, every possible combination. And if we get a corresponding angle, ascendant or MC, that is also one of these peaks, it says, ding! And it lists those down here. Gives you down the list.
List in any order? Or
No, it's simply a list. And you can sort it by ascendant, by MC, and by time. This is sorted by MC. It's not graded as in importance. It's simply a list. Jigsaw is trying to do the rectification in a non-value judgment way. You have to bring in value judgment a little later on, but it's actually just taking the person's life, taking the planetary positions, making a graph, letting you choose what graph you want to use, taking the peaks of the graphs, converting it to common peaks, or finding the peaks, and then using those peaks and the person's place of birth to ascertain if those peaks can constitute a set of angles, an MC or an ascendant. Okay, so that gives us a list, and because we're ranging the whole 24 hours, the list can be quite long, sometimes short. Now, I'll tell you now, he's born exactly at 12 noon. I mean, I figure the guy's going to know when he's born. This is when he says he's born. So it does pick it up quite nicely. But we've got this list, and we don't know this at this stage. We can sort it in different ways. I tend to sort it by time, but it's totally up to you. We can override this. We can select stuff. We can say, no, I want this peak in. And you see I've highlighted that, and you see it's just added it to it. I want this peak in. And you see I've just added it to the list. I can do another one. Can you see I'm just adding? And if I scan for angles, I'm going to get a huge list of angles now. In other words, I can select whatever I want here, and then I can just scan for angles, and it will work out the celestial geometry of those peaks. I will clear that, I will hit auto select again, and then I scan for angles. But you can override it, in other words. Jigsaw will always try and help you, but you can override Jigsaw's decisions, and that's the important thing. Okay, when you're ready now, go to the next tutorial in this list to see what we're going to do with that list of possible birth times for Cyril Fagan.